Books for summer reading on this week's podcast.
Bald,
Blind,
and Buddies. What's up, Timmy C? What do you have for me today, pal?
It's a nice day here in Wisconsin. Had some showers, but it's back to not raining, which is nice.
And it's June, which is always a positive, right?
Yep, all those parties, all those graduation parties.
Love it. Love it. Love it. We just had a graduation party. Now, I have to preface this by saying I think there's too many graduations. You know, you graduate kindergarten, you graduate fourth grade, you graduate fifth grade, you graduate middle school, you graduate high school. It's cool. But they had a fifth grade party for my daughter's school at a local park. But my wife was the one, and my neighbor were the ones who were sort of the PTO, point people on it, as it were, and had to plan the whole thing. I was tasked with getting the Costco pizzas. They're $10. Have you ever had Costco pizza?
I love them. They're good.
I do too.
Yeah.
Their pepperoni is really good. However, because they cut it into 6 pieces as opposed to 8, do you know what the calories are on a piece of cheese Costco pizza?
450.
700.
Yowzers.
700. Now the pepperoni, which is ironic, and I think maybe because they put less cheese, is only 620. Can you imagine that? Yeah. So if you need an excuse to go pepperoni, there you go. There's your excuse.
620 calories for a pepperoni slice of Costco pizza.
700 for the cheese, which leads me to believe that probably the cheese is just they douse it in cheese. Yeah. It is good, though. And their sauce is very good. Actually, I don't think there's anything that's not at least top quality that Costco carries. Agree? Yeah. Disagree?
No, I agree. We're getting cakes, Costco cakes for Peter's graduation party next week. So
he's a cutie. I got your invite. Of course, I'm not going to be able to make it. I appreciate it, but he will be getting a graduation gift, multiple from us, the Bolins. Cool. So wish him the best.
Yeah.
He's a cutie in that picture. By the way, Costco, my buddy pointed this out. Next time you go, just kind of keep a loose affiliation with this. It's $20 a minute you spend in there. You're in there 20 minutes, you're out $400.
Wow.
Don't you think?
I think that's a little steep for us. We're a little slower pace here in the Midwest.
That's true. That's true. But the one that I always dread is, and I'm not cheap, this, but when we come back from the beach, because we don't really vacation very much for, 50, 49 weeks. And then we always seem to go to the beach the last week of July. We usually go out west, and we're doing that again this year. And Katie, to her credit, will kind of drain the cabinets, drain the refrigerator and such. And then we do the Costco when we get back, and it's like, okay, is this a mortgage payment or is it going to be bigger?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So anyway. So Timmy, what are we talking about today?
Well, speaking of rampant consumerism, John, we have an ad read today.
Oh, that's right. Okay. A new, okay, go ahead.
New sponsor. John, sometimes it's over and it's just time to move on. Our partners at the firm of Have No, Grace, and Shame can help. Maybe there are assets or kids or a country to think about. Maybe you have to divide up the rights to that ill-fated cologne project, Smells Like Trouble Musk, or put a bunch of those black mega hats on eBay. Well, you do that. Life goes on. Get on with it and we can help. We saw it coming. Have no grace and shame. We can help.
Timmy. That's obviously germane and topical with the news this week. Are you shocked by this breakup of the world's wealthiest man, Elon Musk, and the president of the United States?
Well, you saw this coming, that he was going to hit the meat grinder of the federal government and not be able to do much, that would happen to Elon Musk. But I think it actually goes to show that I think Elon Musk had some investment, not necessarily capital, but in the process of shrinking government and reducing deficits. And Trump doesn't seem to be going along with that right now,
But he did actually invest significant capital in getting Republicans elected. He spent nearly $300 million of his own money. So it's not as though,
that's
for
true.
A guy that's worth $100 billion, that's like you and me finding $5 in our jeans,
yeah.
Which, by the way, how great is that when you find money after you do wash? It's just
totally.
The best,
yeah.
Right? You put on jeans you haven't worn since the fall and there's $20 in there.
Yeah.
I was not shocked by this. There is a book by an author by the name of Rick Wilson. He's one of the founders of the Lincoln Project. They're under scrutiny for their behavior. Are they spending it appropriately? And did they help, Trump in many ways? But he wrote a book called Everything Trump Touches Dies. And I think there's a validity to that. I'm not going to question the man's talent. You don't become president not once, but twice without significant talent. But it is important to remember he's been divorced 3 times. He has 5 children with 3 different women. He has been bankrupt 6 times. He doesn't have the most stellar record of success. Now, you certainly can't minimize the fact that he became president. So I'm not equating that. But my point being is I do think there's an element that he sees everything as a transaction. I don't think he really has friends or people in his life that have been there a long time. I don't know. I don't know the man. I am the least shocked human being in the world about this. When you have 2 people with colossal egos, that tends to happen. It's kind of the old rule. Like there's certain things in life, like don't invade Russia in the winter. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and the IRS is going to win the battle of taxes, right?
Yeah.
There's just certain, truths in life, and I just saw this coming. It seems to have accelerated quickly. Do you have any input in that, or is there any reason you saw it happen so quickly? He went from being Trump's best friend in January to now they're, slinging insults at each other like children in June.
Well, I think it was the big, beautiful bill, right? I think Musk saw things in there that he didn't like and spoke up about it. And that's the last thing you do to a narcissist, right?
You would know. I'm not the psychiatrist. You are. So is that challenging their authority is not a good idea when you're a narcissist?
Yeah. You don't contradict them.
Okay. Fair enough. But you got to figure, that Elon Musk doesn't suffer for ego either. Right.
Right.
So, and they're both now slinging insults at each other. And I guess the one that really sort of caught the media's attention. And again, I really have tuned out, Timmy, for better or for worse, I have. Is he had said part of the reason that the Epstein files have not been released is because Donald J. Trump features prominently in there. That may very well be true. There's a number of people of note who figure apparently prominently in that story. So I would like to see it released, but I'm also very, I suppose, not shocked, if you will, that Epstein committed suicide, supposedly. So,
right.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, Tim, I think we're also going to be talking about books today for the summer, right? But before we do that, did you want to give the trivia answer?
Oh, yeah. So the question was, what president first flew on an airplane? And I should say during his term as president, because I found another answer.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's 2 different answers?
Yeah.
All right, well, why don't you give them both?
So during his term as president would be FDR on a Ford Trimotor. But, of course, in 1910, TR flew. The adventurer Teddy Roosevelt flew like 20 years earlier.
Huh. So who was the first one in his term?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Oh, so both Roosevelt. Both Roosevelt.
Yep.
One's Teddy, one's Franklin. I got you. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised by Teddy Roosevelt being the first. He was, he bestowed the most national parks. He was very much an outdoorsman, adventurer. He was shot and just continued on with his speech.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. And I have a trivia question. My trivia question was about the U.S. Open, which is coming up. It's going to be played at Oakmont next week. It's always around Father's Day, which is a nice thing. By the way, did you ask for anything specific for Father's Day? Is there anything that you particularly want?
No, not really.
No?
No.
I asked for 2 things related to golf. One is a rangefinder. It's that thing that tells you how far it is. They're $100. And then there's a friend of mine who has this thing called putter ball, Putter, and then space ball. And it's basically a game where you putt on a green and you have to make it into individual holes, and then you cover up the holes when you make it. So the idea is whoever gets the most holes covered up wins. It's fun. It's $150. It's a silly game, but something that we could play with the kids and keep them off of their iPads.
Yeah.
But to that end, the answer, you had guessed Jack Nicklaus. Most people guessed Tiger Woods. You also guessed Arnold Palmer. None of those are correct. The answer is the fellow who just became the most recent entry into the Grand Slam Club, which is Rory McIlroy. He shot 16 under at Congressional Country Club in Bethesda, Maryland, about a decade or so ago. Yeah.
Wow.
So, but we are headlong into baseball season, and I love baseball. I love everything about it. It just reeks of Americana. I have a question for you this week, and this is an interesting one. Who holds the record for the most consecutive stolen bases, which is a lost art in baseball today? The most consecutive stolen bases without being caught, meaning tagged out by second. Any guess?
No idea.
The obvious answer is the one with the most stolen bases, which is, of course, Ricky Henderson. He is not the correct answer.
All right.
Yeah. So, well, Timmy, why don't you set the stage? What are we talking about today?
We're talking about, maybe you're on vacation, you got a little time this summer. throwing out some books for a potential summer reading list. And, why is reading important? I think there's this modern notion that you can't really understand someone unless you check the same demographic identity boxes as they do. And I think reading challenges that, right? Good reading puts us in contact with other people's experiences, lives, etc. I think that's useful. And the other thing is, I don't think you necessarily know good reading until you're exposed to it. Like I was working through Romeo and Juliet with my son, and you just read it and you're like, wow. Like, people can understand bad grammar and write grammatically, but like there's another level of reading of language that you just don't know until you've seen it.
I enjoy when there's a word that I don't know. Do you find yourself with that where you have to look it up?
Oh, totally.
And it could be something, and it's usually an antiquated word or one that you've already heard, but it has an everyday meaning.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not something that they use. I always enjoy that. So
yeah.
Is there a theme to the books you're recommending? Why don't you go first? I have 4, and I have a theme, which is I really tend to like nonfiction. Why am I saying this? Because some people aren't into that and want to just sort of be entertained at the beach. And that's fine. And I'm also going to throw in some books that my wife, Katie, has, an author that she really likes and enjoys, and she's looking forward to reading, just to kind of spice it up. But I always preface this. My taste may not be your taste. I just tend to like historical fiction. And there's 4 books I'm looking to read this summer. I think I'll get through at least 2 or 3 of them. And I'll tell you about them. But do you have a theme to yours, Timmy?
It's books that just made me think or see something differently, or even supported something I thought I knew. I think, or just opened up some area I hadn't even thought about.
Okay. Well, why don't you go first? Tell us one of your books, and then I'll tell you one of mine.
So the first one is Bottoms Up and the Devil Laughs, A Journey Through the Deep State by Kerry Howley.
You mentioned that in a previous podcast.
I did, actually. Sorry.
Podcast, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it just sparked something.
Yeah, it talks about the age of the indelible. So basically, we're going through the world, interacting with smartphones, emails, etc., and we're leaving these breadcrumbs about our lives, right? And they can be assembled and gathered by governments, corporations, etc. But the thing that I got out of this was, if you think about how they used to do ransom notes by cutting out newspaper letters to spell out anything you wanted, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can do that with people's own histories, and you can find any story in there you want to find given enough data. So unscrupulous people can assemble things to support whatever hypothesis they want out of that much information.
Well, the famous saying, the only thing necessary for evil to succeed is for people of note to do nothing, or good people of note to do nothing. So that was it's a good read, and it's also, I thought, thought-provoking. So. Now, when you read, do you prefer Braille, or do you listen to the audiobooks, or do you do the combination of both?
Pretty much all audiobooks. I do one magazine in Braille just to keep my skills up, but otherwise it's all audio.
We produce, my company, but I won't go too deep into this, but it's fascinating because 1 page of typical print corresponds to 3 to 5 pages of Braille, just depending on the layout and font size and things of that nature. So when you get a Braille book, it's big.
It's huge.
Right?
So when I was in high school, there was this small sort of, maybe 2 or 3 closet size room where I would keep all my books. And one textbook would be maybe 3 feet high by like 6 feet wide. Worth of
it's
stuff.
got to be heavy too,
yeah,
right?
and I'd have to go in.
Dense.
I'd have to go in and get volume to and get the next volume of my math book, and it was it's a lot of space.
They just didn't have the audio the way they do today, right? I mean,
well, it
35
depends.
years ago.
Yeah, no, It was a mix. So like a literary book on audio is fine, but if you're trying to learn Spanish or do calculus, the Braille is a lot better.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I find, and I do a combo, I tend to read a book or 2 at the beach. We always go to the beach the last week of July. And I will do audiobooks while I go for like my morning exercise or walk or what have you. But I make sure to stop at a chapter. And then I have the physical book, and I'll just read that at the beach. I just pick up at the next chapter. So you stop on chapter 4, you pick up on chapter 5, and so forth. So, but I'll tell you, I do like audiobooks. There's something about having it read to you that's very, very interesting as a experience, I think.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, totally.
yeah. The book I'm reading is by Jeffrey Toobin. Why is Jeffrey Toobin famous? Because he was a legal analyst. He graduated Harvard Law School, and he became famous for sort of a not so great purpose. Do you know what I'm referring to, Timmy?
I recognize the name. I can't place it.
So He thought he had turned off his camera. He did not. He proceeded to engage in improper behavior on video camera when he was in his room by himself. I'll leave it at that. But he is a fabulously interesting guy. He was a legal analyst. He's since sort of regained his name. I think it's just more embarrassing than anything. But he has since regained his name, and he has put out a number of books about current events and things of that nature. He wrote The Run of His Life, which was about the O.J. Simpson trial. I'm actually going to read the one called Homegrown, which was published, I want to say it's about 10 years old. I'll check that to be sure, but it's about Timothy McVeigh. And I'm fascinated. It's already 30 years since Oklahoma City, which is incredible to think about. But it's about Timothy McVeigh and the rise of right-wing extremism. Part of the reason I'm fascinated by that is because I love historical nonfiction. But secondarily, I'm going to be heading out to Idaho later this year with my family. And of course, my brother lives in Coeur d'Alene, and where the white supremacists would train for years was in northern Idaho, just outside of Coeur d'Alene. So it'll be kind of topical for me. And then my brother, I'm going to ask him if we're out there, if maybe I can drive by, because they've since torn down all of the camps and facilities and such. But I'm fascinated by that story because it doesn't get the same press. I think that September 11th, obviously the magnitude of September 11th and so forth, but I think it's just as interesting to me from a perspective of what drives people to terrorism, for better or for worse. So it's called Homegrown. It's by Jeffrey Toobin. So cool. That's the first one. Yeah.
And I think what drives people is also part of why I read and some books I like. And the next book is When McKinsey Comes to Town: The Hidden Influence of the World's Most Powerful Consulting Firm, McKinsey and Associates.
Yeah. Oh man, be prepared to be irate. Okay, I'm ready for this.
Yeah. It's by Walt Bogdanich. So basically, McKinsey is this, if you haven't heard of it, it's basically an amoral catalyst of most bad ideas in the past 100 years. For example, they helped Purdue Pharma figure out how to sell more oxycodone. They were involved in corruption, I think, in South Africa, allegedly.
Oh, yeah.
And on two sides of negotiating Medicaid issues in Illinois, for example. So it's amazing. So these people come in and they tell you how to do whatever you're going to do more efficiently, probably regardless of what you want to do is, necessarily legal, right, or et cetera. They're just a catalyst, but it's a fascinating.
But that's not
book.
all they do. We have to be fair, right? I mean, they are a very, very well-known consulting firm. I would imagine the book is probably not going to paint the best picture of their behavior.
No.
One of our buddies from Dillon Hall, who shall remain nameless, I'll tell you off air, works for them still since college. He's a senior partner there.
Wow.
John Oliver did a skit on McKinsey, and I'll send it to you. In fact, I'll send it to you, Timmy. Maybe you can link it in the show notes about, we're McKinsey and you're not, so clearly you're an idiot. They've had a run of bad press, but I think most of the consulting firms, I think people misunderstand that oftentimes what is the right thing to do may not be lucrative. And I liken it to attorneys. Everyone's entitled to an attorney. And if you pay an attorney, they'll pretty much argue whatever you tell them to argue. Right. And there's an element that I think sits uneasy with people about that. And the same thing with these sort of consulting firms. McKinsey was most famous, obviously, for the Purdue Pharma one. Yeah, they've gotten a black eye for sure from that. So
yeah, it's a good read. I recommend it.
Okay. I'm going to read a book. 1961, the Berlin Wall came up. And there is a book out now called Tunnel 29. And it's by an author who I'm not familiar with, but it is highly recommended on Amazon. Her name is Helena Merriman. Yeah, Merriman. Tunnel 29, the true story of an extraordinary escape beneath the Berlin Wall in 1961. It's a story of teenagers that essentially dug a hole to escape from the east to the west. And that's pretty much all I know about it. But I've had an opportunity to actually own a piece of the Berlin Wall. I bought it at a museum in Berlin. Now, Timmy, could it be a rock that they found on the street and said this is part of the Berlin Wall? Sure. But do I know that? No. So I'm assuming it's a part of the Berlin Wall. I have a piece. And I'm just always fascinated by that. Governments trying to keep their people in. Ronald Reagan always said that. We in America have a lot of faults, basically, he said, but we've never been forced to build a wall to keep our people from fleeing.
Yeah.
So there is an element to that. And I'm always fascinated by that story. And it was up only for 28 years from 1961 to 1989. But there are a number of movies, books, stories about this. And I'm interested to see what this one's all about. Tunnel 29 by Helena Merriman. So
cool. So mine also intersects with communism. The Wrong Stuff. How
The state of Wisconsin.
Yeah. Close. This one's called The Wrong Stuff, How the Soviet Space Program Crashed and Burned by John Strausbaugh. And it's a great story about sort of grit, determination, authoritarianism, all the problems with top-down economies, ego, self-deception, deception of others. I'll just give you one example. So the U.S. puts up the Gemini program, which has 2 astronauts in it. That's the claim to fame, right? We put 2 astronauts up at once. The Russians are like, well, we can beat that. So they take their 1-man capsule and they cram 3 people in it and blast it off, right? And this happens in our country. This happens everywhere all the time. When you start to rely on metrics, right? People per capsule, right? You can cheat metrics and lose the whole point of the endeavor. And I think
Right.
it's a fascinating and kind of fun read.
I'm always reminded there was a quote in the newspaper I read just in the last day or two, and they said, those that are closest to the forest sometimes have difficulty seeing the trees.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. Yeah. No, that's probably a fascinating read. You know, it's important, though, to remember that Sputnik really sort of scared the you-know-what out of people. The fact
totally.
that the Russians got, the Soviets got into space first. And, Kennedy gave that famous speech where he said, I believe this nation should dedicate itself to achieving the goal before the decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth, which they did, July 20th, 1969.
But you think that was real, John?
That was a big deal. How do you feel about that? Because I've heard mixed reviews about this because, this feud between Trump and Musk could be problematic for the space race. If, they've got people up there in the International Space Station. And if he basically cuts off his funding, which he's threatening to do, or cuts off his, involvement in the space program, it's going to be Russia that does everything from now on. Do you think that pure research like that is worth it? I do. I think that it speaks to the human endeavor that we should put somebody on Mars. Why? Because we can. How do you feel about that, Timmy?
I think there's a mix of priorities, and I think space exploration with humans is pretty darn expensive when you have other priorities.
Okay. All right. I'm okay with even if we don't do you believe in research for that purpose by itself, sending, machines to Mars?
I think it's fine. I mean, if you look at the Kennedy thing, it was basically to prove that if we can put a man on the moon, we can put an ICBM wherever the heck we want.
Of course.
Right. That's what that was for. It was a Cold War.
It was also a man measuring his what against another man. Yeah, I understand.
So that's what that was. I mean, I'm all for research, but I think you do have to balance priorities, right?
Okay. All right. Well, my third book is World War II. The famous scene in Jaws when they're talking on the boat and he's talking about how he has on the Indianapolis and delivered the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb. Little man. Paul Tibbets flew do you know the name of the plane that they flew?
Enola Gay was the first one.
The Enola Gay, yeah. That's right. Little Boy was the first one. Fat Man was the second one that landed on Nagasaki. I'm always fascinated by the Indianapolis because it was sunk and went down in a matter of minutes. And the men who went into the water, about 2/3 of them ended up dying through shark attacks. And that was made famous in the movie Jaws. There is a book called In Harm's Way about the true story of the Indianapolis. And Paul Allen, who was famous for co-founding Microsoft with Bill Gates, was fascinated by this as well and actually paid for the expedition to go out and find the Indianapolis. And before he died in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, they found the USS Indianapolis very deep, so to speak. But I'm fascinated by that story because literally the Indianapolis was delivering the bomb. It was so secret they couldn't, put out distress signals. And these soldiers, went into the water and were summarily killed by sharks. A fascinating story. And obviously Jaws sort of brought it to light, but I'm interested in reading the book because sometimes, Hollywood takes liberties. I don't know how accurate that story is in Jaws. I'm assuming most of it is, but I'm interested in reading this book called In Harm's Way by Doug Stanton. And it's about the USS Indianapolis. So
cool. Well, I've got a light one for folks who like fiction. It's a series by Robert Bailey. The first one is called The Professor. So it features this law school professor who winds up having to try a court case, late into his life. And it's neat because it plays off these kinds of characters that some of them you wish existed in the real world, or you wished you were like them. And you can see motivations are pretty well explained. And it's a great story that's entertaining with enough twists and some likable and flawed characters. So
It's fiction though, right?
all fiction. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Would you go back to school? Do you have any interest in that? Just to go for school's sake? I'd love to go back to law school.
Sometimes I think I might like law school, but I don't think so. I think I'm done. I think
Knowing your personality, I think they'd ask you quietly to leave.
yeah, I think I'm done.
Dr. Cordes, could you do me a favor and just stay home tomorrow?
Yeah.
Sure. Speaking of light fiction, I wanted to mention Colleen Hoover is the author. She writes, and I'll read the actual description of her so I have it appropriately. She's a pretty well-known author, and it says here, Colleen Hoover is a New York Times bestselling author of young adult and new adult contemporary romance, psychological thrillers, and ghost stories. And I see them all over the place. They have the local book clubs and so forth. And my wife was in one, and they're always recommending Colleen Hoover. So if you're looking for sort of a light page turner, something, that's not heavy, those are supposed to be great stories. So is there anything that Blue Leaf or anybody that that wanted to call out something that's a little bit more light?
Well, I don't know if it's light, but Blue Leaf wanted to call out Can't Is Not an Option, My American Story by Nikki Haley.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah.
And the final one I have actually is about Barry Seal. Have you ever heard of Barry Seal?
I don't think so.
He's a fascinating guy. I don't know the whole story and I don't want to ruin it, but they've since made this into a movie in the last 5 or 8 years with Tom Cruise called American Made. It's a true story. Barry Seal was a pilot from Louisiana, I want to say. And after he found that there was a whole lot of money to be made in the 1980s and the late 70s, early 80s as a pilot flying for the drug cartels, particularly Pablo Escobar. Speaking of which, if you ever have a chance, the author who wrote Black Hawk Down writes for the Philadelphia Inquirer, or did. I don't know if he's still with the Philadelphia Inquirer. His name is Mark Bowden, Bowden. He's most famous for writing Black Hawk Down, which became, a Hollywood movie and such. But perhaps his best book that I've ever read was Killing Pablo, which is about the hunt for Pablo Escobar. Well, this kind of dovetails with it. It's called Smuggler's End. It's the life and death of Barry Seal. He was flying for the Medellin drug cartel, was arrested by the U.S., and then made an informant for the U.S. government. Pablo Escobar ends up putting a bounty on his head, $1 million alive, $500,000 dead. They end up killing him, I think in 1986 it was. But this is called Smuggler's End, the life and death of Barry Seal. I'm not saying he's a good person. I'm saying it's probably a fascinating story, and that's one I'm definitely going to read this summer.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, well, Timmy, who's your whack job this week? Who do you have?
Yeah. So this one comes from the University of Michigan, actually. So
staying in the Big Ten, though, at least.
Yeah, staying in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
So research has unearthed that the regents of the University of Michigan have paid around $800,000 between June 2023 and September 2024 for this group called the City Shield, which is a private detective firm or security firm. And apparently they are shadowing, surveilling, and maybe intimidating pro-Gaza protesters. So, and some of the data gathered has been used in charging folks with crimes. So here, my whack job is twofold here. These students are paying tens of thousands of dollars a year to get an education, right? And if you have all this time to arrange protests, you're not maximizing the value of that education, right?
Or are they? Because I'm a big believer in the First Amendment. I mean, you have the right to protest, right? You're not minimizing that, are you?
No, of course not. But all I know is in college, I worked quite hard. And I studied.
You did. You graduated valedictorian, for those that don't know. Timmy graduated valedictorian with 1 A- in 4 years, and he wasn't a major in Hungarian basket weaving. What were you, biochem?
It was biochem, yeah. And my roommate, Alexei, when things would get crazy at Dillon Hall, would shout out the window, "Go study." So these people, you have the right to protest. If you want to protest, great. But it might be nice if you didn't waste the tens of thousands of dollars you're paying for your education, right?
I understand. I think you have a legitimate argument there. I'm just saying the First Amendment is sacrosanct. I mean, you have the right. No, and these are spoiled kids, no question.
And the university spent $800,000, which would have been in-state tuition for 47 students on this. So just wasting money. So this is a waste on both sides.
I'll give you the university. I don't know if I'm prepared for the students, but I understand what you're saying.
Go to class and stop shadowing your students, okay?
Dr. Alexi would say. He's a doctor too, right?
He is.
Yeah, go study, right?
Go study.
Well, Timmy, we were talking about how we enjoy hearing, and I do too. I try as best I can. I'm not saying that I don't fall into my own sort of echo chambers. Everyone does. We're all guilty of it. I'm sure I'm more guilty than most. But I read 3 newspapers almost daily: the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. And my premise is, if you read those 3, you're getting, liberal, more liberal, and clearly conservative. And somewhere, I think, in the middle is probably where most Americans lie. Well, this is a commentary. This was an opinion article that's to be published. I think it was published on Friday, June 6th. Yeah. It's by a young woman by the name of Naomi Epps Best, B-E-S-T. And she is she's a graduate student in family therapy at Santa Clara University. And the title of the article is Santa Clara University's Crazy Idea of Human Sexuality. And then the byline says, to become a therapist, I'm expected to watch bondage videos and submit a sexual autobiography. And what she does is she basically lays out, which I think you tend to highlight, and I'm not as privy to it because I wasn't in the university setting, that there's orthodoxies in universities. And if you violate them, you are sort of shunned, so to speak, right?
Absolutely.
And it said, she says, I'm 26, newly married, mother of a 1-year-old girl and a few credits from graduating. And she says, I've pursued every institutional channel available. I've even sought short-term therapy through campus mental health, which I was denied. A staff psychologist told me my department has a history of demanding intimate self-discourse from students, a practice he himself regards as unethical. And it's basically this idea that, she is being required to talk about her whiteness and how that influences. I think if you're a family therapist, you're supposed to help the family. I don't know that your race and gender and all these other things necessarily should be germane, right, Timmy?
Absolutely.
So I give her a lot of credit. She published an opinion article, took on a very well-established university, and basically highlighted what you talked about, which is there are orthodoxies that if you violate them in universities, you're shunned, and that's unacceptable. So if you're not going to have challenging ideas in universities, where in God's name are you going to have them?
Totally. I agree with this 100%. John, we should try to get her on the show.
Okay. We'll do so. How about that?
Let's try
we've said this, we need more women on this show, right?
Yeah. And I think she would be the best to have on our show.
Okay. I will take that as a challenge. And anyone out there, all 12 and 13 of you that are listening, if you happen to have an in at Santa Clara or have a way of getting in touch with her, send it to us. I'll take the reins on this one. There you go, Timmy.
I will tell you this. I had a patient who came to me and they had seen a therapist, and they said, I talked to them about my problems, and they tried to convince me I was, some sort of gender variation. And they said, I came in thinking this was my problem. And that's what happens when this orthodoxy supersedes the patient, right? So this really happens.
Huh.
Yeah.
This isn't a passing judgment. I'm not a sex therapist. I'm not a family therapist. I don't pretend to be. Love is the one thing you have to get right once to be an expert. So I don't know this stuff. But my point being is it doesn't seem to me that universities, you have to establish your whiteness and saying this and that. That doesn't seem to be relevant to me. And it, good for her for doing this. She's probably going to face significant blowback. And again, I will preface this by saying, this is half the story. We haven't heard Santa Clara's contentions, right?
Yeah.
That being said, even if half of this is true or a third of this is true, I find it to be unacceptable. And it's probably a point well received that you always talk about, that, if you violate sort of orthodoxies, particularly in university settings, it's, you're not treated as someone with a different opinion. You're treated as wrong. So,
yeah. It's no longer the place for free inquiry and speech.
Well, there's how it signs off. And I think this is a great way to sign up. You ready?
Yeah.
This is Miss Best. Signs off by saying, speaking up does come with risk, but in a field where dissent is discouraged and students are coerced, I've chosen to say no more. I thought that was great. Hear, hear.
She's my hero. I
there you
totally
go.
hear you.
You can't steal my hero. She's my hero.
Okay, deal.
Well, Timmy, have a great week, and we'll catch up this week. And I will take it as a challenge to get Miss Best on the podcast. But this is John Bolin signing off, saying, hey, misbehave, drive fast, take chances.
And this is Tim saying, if everybody likes what you're doing, you're probably not doing anything worthwhile. Take care out there.